Paula Ann Boudreau. Paula Ann Boudreau was born on the 3rd of December, 1963, to her parents, Victor and Leona. By 22, she was living in the small community of Golden Meadow, Louisiana, residing with her parents and raising her young son, Eric. On the evening of the 3rd of August, 1986, Paula set out with her sister, Lilium, to attend the Bull Club Fair, a local festivity that traditionally followed the blessing of the Fleet Boat Parade on Bayou Lafourche. By 10:30 p.m., Paula had her fill of the festival, and her sister drove her back to their parents' home. That drop-off was the final time Paula was ever seen alive. It remains uncertain if her parents were awake upon her return, but sometime after she walked through the door, she vanished into the night. Her family reported her missing shortly after, and a search commenced, but the case soon ran cold, leaving a cloud of uncertainty over the town for years. 3 years later, in 1989, a grim discovery was made. Hunters stumbled upon skeletal remains in a wooded area of Slidell, Louisiana, but without the technology of today, the identity of the victim remained a mystery. The bones would lie unnamed for over 3 decades. Then, in 2022, the LSU Faces Lab began work on a facial reconstruction of the unknown victim. This sparked a crucial break when an anonymous tip led investigators to consider a link to Paula's case. The tip came from her distant cousin, Michelle Choist, who had been delving into her family's genealogy. Michelle found a chilling connection between Paula's disappearance and the Jane Doe discovered in Slidell. She recalled family rumors that Paula's hands had been missing a detail that matched the forensic report of the unidentified remains. When Michelle saw the lab's clay rendering of the Jane Doe, she was stunned by the uncanny resemblance to Paula. Acting on her intuition, she contacted the lab. In 2023, advanced DNA testing confirmed her hunch was correct. While her identity was finally restored, the exact circumstances of Paula's death are still shrouded in mystery. Forensic evidence indicated she had been dismembered and her remains transported to Slidell, but a definitive cause of death has never been publicly released. In July 2024, a major development occurred when Russell Lee and Judith Weiser were arrested and charged with second-degree murder and obstruction of justice in connection with Paula's death. However, hope for justice was short-lived. A grand jury later determined there was insufficient evidence to proceed to trial, and the charges were dropped. The decision left many questioning the investigation, but without conclusive proof, a conviction was impossible. Investigators have long explored a potential love triangle as a motive. Paula was allegedly involved with a married man, and just days before she disappeared, she was reportedly threatened by a woman known for a violent temper. While jealousy provides a plausible motive, the theory remains unproven. Further complicating the case is the story of a rumored confession that surfaced not long after Paula vanished, only to be inexplicably lost before authorities could act on it. Over the decades, whispers of local corruption have persisted, with some suggesting that critical evidence was deliberately destroyed or concealed. Sheriff Craig Wabra has denied these allegations, but the rumors have cast a lasting shadow on the integrity of the initial investigation. On May 6, 2025, a graveside service was held at Cherami Cemetery, where Paula's family was finally able to lay her to rest. If you have information that could help bring justice to Paula and her family, please contact the Lafourche Parish Sheriff's Office at 985-448-2111. Anthony Sowell. It looked like it was a body, and it had no head on it. In 2009, Cleveland police crossed the threshold of a modest home on Imperial Avenue. What they unearthed inside would not only traumatize the city but horrify the entire country. The residence didn't just have a bad odor, it reeked of death. Concealed in crawl spaces, buried in shallow graves, and scattered throughout the backyard were the decomposing bodies of women, 11 victims in all. The man who lived there was Anthony Sowell, a convicted rapist who had been killing with impunity while hidden in plain sight. Anthony Sowell's early life was a textbook case of cruelty begetting cruelty. Born in 1959, he was raised in a home governed by abuse. His mother was notoriously violent, lashing her children with extension cords and subjecting them to sadistic punishments. Sowell later confessed that he carried the rage from his childhood with him his entire life. By his early adulthood, he had already begun his descent into sexual violence. In 1989, Sowell committed a savage rape, luring a pregnant woman to his home, binding her, and assaulting her for hours. He was convicted and served 15 years in prison. That crime should have been a permanent red flag, marking him as a severe danger to society. Instead, in 2005, he was released. He moved into a house on Imperial Avenue, a property that would soon become his personal graveyard. Almost immediately, neighbors noticed something was wrong. An overpowering stench hung in the air. At first, they attributed it to a nearby sausage factory or persistent sewer issues. The odor was so intense that residents lodged formal complaints, but city officials paid them little mind. No one could have fathomed that the source of the smell was the bodies of Sowell's victims, slowly decaying within the walls and beneath the soil of his home. Sowell's method was terrifyingly consistent. He preyed on women in vulnerable situations, many of fans dreading fifth, whom were battling addiction or experiencing homelessness. He would invite them to his house with offers of food, alcohol, or shelter. Once they were inside, he transformed from host to predator. He strangled them, sometimes with his bare hands, other times with a ligature. He then disposed of their bodies throughout his property. Some he interred in shallow graves in his backyard. Others he left in crawl spaces or simply covered with a blanket in an upstairs room. For years, this house of horrors stood just yards away from families leading their everyday lives. The victims vanished without a trace. Their families filed missing persons reports, but for many, the pleas for help went unanswered. Because the women were predominantly poor, black, and struggling with personal demons, their disappearances were not afforded the urgency they deserved. This societal indifference became Sowell's shield, allowing him to continue his killing spree, confident his crimes would remain unnoticed. Everything shifted in September 2009. A woman named Latundra Billups reported to police that Sowell had lured her into his house, where he raped her and attempted to strangle her. She escaped and went directly to the authorities. Her credible report gave officers the probable cause they needed to obtain a search warrant. On the 29th of October, they entered the home on Imperial Avenue. What they found was a scene from a nightmare. The smell of putrefying flesh was overwhelming. Investigators first discovered 2 bodies in the living room and then located more remains in the basement and backyard. As the search intensified, more bodies were uncovered in crawl spaces and other hidden areas of the house. In total, the remains of 11 women were recovered. Some had been dead for years. They were women like Crystal Dozier, Tonia Carmichael, and Talacia Fortson lives violently extinguished, their stories all but forgotten until investigators began to piece them together. The house itself was a grotesque tableau. Swarms of flies filled the rooms. Stains from bodily fluids marked the floors and furniture. Some of the victims were so badly decomposed that identifying them took months. Forensic experts had to rely on DNA analysis and dental records to restore their names. When Sowell was finally arrested, his reaction was chillingly detached. He expressed no remorse and claimed he couldn't remember killing so many women, suggesting his memory was clouded by drugs and alcohol. But prosecutors presented a very different narrative. This was not the work of a man lost in a blackout. It was the cold, methodical predation of a monster who lured, controlled, and disposed of his victims as if they were trash. The 2011 trial was one of the most harrowing in Ohio's history. The courtroom was filled with the victims' family members, clutching photos of their lost mothers, sisters, and daughters. Prosecutors laid out the gruesome evidence, photos of the remains, testimony from the few who had escaped his grasp, and accounts of the horrific stench that had plagued the neighborhood for years. The defense argued that Sowell suffered from brain damage and the effects of long-term substance abuse, pleading for a life sentence instead of death. The jury was unmoved. After weeks of disturbing testimony, they convicted Anthony Sowell on 82 counts, including aggravated murder, kidnapping, and rape, and recommended the death penalty. On the 12th of August 2011, Sowell was formally sentenced to die. He spent nearly a decade on death row. In February 2021, before his execution could be carried out, Anthony Sowell died of a terminal illness. He never faced lethal injection, but he spent his final years caged in a cell. The case of Anthony Sowell leaves behind brutal, unanswered questions. How could such a failure of the system occur? Neighbors had complained about the smell for years. Families had begged the police to find their missing loved ones. Yet, because the victims came from marginalized communities, their lives were treated as expendable. Sowell exploited that indifference, certain that no one would ever look too closely at the house on Imperial Avenue. The house itself became a symbol of this tragedy. After the investigation concluded, the city demolished it. For the residents of Cleveland, it was more than just a building. It was a gaping wound in the community, a monument to the horrors that can fester behind ordinary walls. Today, the lot where it stood is an empty patch of grass, but its memory remains a scar on the city that will never completely fade. Alexander Lutai. In the very land that gave birth to Western democracy and philosophy, a profound darkness persists, one that starkly contrasts with its celebrated history. Despite its immense cultural contributions to the world, modern Greece grapples with deeply entrenched issues of sexism and legislation that has historically been lenient towards physical assault. These systemic failures are now under intense scrutiny, catalyzed by the heartbreaking case we are about to explore. The story of a vibrant young woman whose life was extinguished, her body discovered amidst the coastal rocks of a Greek island. This is the tragic story of Eleni Topaloudi. Eleni Topaloudi was born on the 15th of January, 1000, 997, in the Greek city of Didymoteicho. She was the cherished daughter of Giannis and Kula Topoloudi, and an older sister to her younger brother. To know Eleni was to be drawn to her. She possessed a radiant spirit and an incredibly positive outlook on life. From a young age, Eleni was recognized for her sharp intellect and an unwavering sense of discipline. Friends and family alike remember her for a playful, fun-loving nature, a contagious smile, and a profound sense of humor that could illuminate any room. Eleni was also driven by ambition and a powerful work ethic, always seeing her commitments through to completion. This was evident in her academic career, which was distinguished by exceptional grades and a remarkable aptitude for languages. By the age of 18, she was fluent in Greek, English, and Arabic. Upon graduating from high school, Eleni's academic excellence earned her a scholarship to study at a university in Rhodes, the second largest of the Greek islands. Though she was initially hesitant to move away from her close-knit family, the powerful desire for independence ultimately won out. With the complete encouragement of her family, she embraced the opportunity. In Rhodes, she quickly cultivated a circle of friends, becoming enchanted by the island's cosmopolitan energy and its laid-back lifestyle. This deep affection for her new home led Eleni to decide that she would remain in Rhodes after finishing her degree, viewing it as the ideal place to launch her career and build her adult life. In 2017, Eleni went to a party with some of her friends. As they were leaving, she and a friend were approached by a car carrying 3 young men, aged between 17 and 21, who had also been at the event. They offered the 2 women a ride, which they accepted. After dropping off Eleni's friend, the driver took an unfamiliar route away from Eleni's home, immediately setting off alarm bells in her mind. Shortly thereafter, she began to feel an overwhelming sense of dizziness and drowsiness, and in that horrifying moment, she knew she had been drugged. Seeing that she was incapacitated by the substance, the men drove Eleni to a desolate area of the island. There, they assaulted her and filmed the entire violation on a mobile phone. The following day, safely back in her home, Eleni struggled to comprehend the horror of the previous night. She was overcome with feelings of devastation and helplessness, emotions almost too profound to articulate. Over the course of the week, her attackers began a campaign of blackmail, using the video to threaten her. They demanded she engage in a relationship with them, or they would make the footage public. Eleni unequivocally refused their demands. In the week that followed the assault, after many discussions with her closest confidantes, Eleni summoned the strength to report the crime to the police. Her courage, however, was met with institutional indifference and crushing disappointment. The officers claimed they were unable to assist her because too much time had elapsed since the incident. Furthermore, they refused to file an official report because she did not possess a copy of the video to substantiate her claim and callously advised her to keep the ordeal to herself. Eleni departed from the police station feeling utterly let down and unprotected by the very system designed to serve her. She then attempted to resume her life and her studies, a monumental challenge as she would sometimes cross paths with her assailants in the city. A year later, in November 2018, Eleni received an unsolicited message on Facebook from a man named Alexandros Loutsai. Point 1. Alexandros, a 20-year-old of Albanian origin, was, like Eleni, a university student in Rhodes. He was an athletic young man who dedicated his free time to working out and participating in marathons, many of which were for charitable causes. The conversation between them developed slowly. Eleni was understandably guarded at first, but with persistence, Alexandros gradually earned her trust. He presented himself as a gentle, polite, and amicable person, frequently complimenting Eleni on her appearance and character. She even commented to friends that his participation in charity marathons had scored him points in her estimation. They corresponded for a little over 2 weeks through Facebook Messenger before making plans to have dinner on the evening of Tuesday, the 27th of November, 2018, at a neighborhood kebab restaurant. Alexandros offered to collect her from the entrance of her building, and she agreed. The very next morning, on the 28th of November, 2 fishermen who had started their day early to capitalize on the calm seas noticed something unusual lodged among the rocks along the shoreline. As they steered their boat closer to investigate, their curiosity turned to absolute horror. What they had discovered was not debris, but the body of Eleni. The authorities were summoned at once, and it wasn't long before police officers converged on the location. A preliminary analysis of the scene led them to surmise that the body had been placed there the previous night. They noted that it was a sheer miracle the body hadn't been swept out to sea by the tide. While fortune had kept her from disappearing into the waves, that luck did not extend to the state of her remains. Eleni was so severely disfigured that she was nearly unrecognizable. It was only a distinctive rose tattoo on her heel that allowed for her positive identification. Eleni's family was informed, left utterly shattered by the news that their beloved daughter had been murdered with such extreme brutality. By gathering statements from her family and friends, investigators learned that on the night of the 27th, at approximately 11 p.m., Eleni had sent a text to a friend. She had asked her friend to message her back in an hour's time, explaining she was in a situation where she didn't want to be impolite and intended to use the message as a pretext to leave. Her friend dutifully sent the requested message and several more, but she never received a reply. While canvassing the area around Eleni's apartment building, the police discovered security cameras. The retrieved footage revealed images of Eleni in the company of 2 young men, Alexandros Loutsai and Manolis Koukouras. It wasn't long before both men were taken into police custody. Manolis was 21 years old and the son of the Koukouras family, an immensely wealthy and powerful clan in Rhodes that owned numerous properties, shops, and restaurants across the island. The family's wealth and influence had created an environment where Manolis grew up believing he was above consequence, that he could do whatever he wanted and obtain anything he desired, even if it required breaking the law. Manolis had frequent run-ins with the authorities, but each time trouble arose, the Koukouras family's money and sway would silence the matter, and Manolis would walk away completely unscathed. Conditioned by this system of impunity and confident that his family's fortune would extricate him from this situation as well, he professed his innocence and denied any involvement in Eleni's death. Alexandros, however, quickly broke under questioning and confessed to everything. His confession provides the only known account of what happened between the night of the 27th and the morning of the 28th. He stated that on the night of the 27th, he arrived near Eleni's apartment around 10 p.m., as they had arranged. He parked his truck a short distance away and went to meet her on foot. They met at her door and walked back towards the vehicle, but upon reaching it, Eleni saw that Manolis was sitting in the passenger seat. Alexandros claimed that through a friendly and casual conversation, they persuaded her to get into the truck and proceed to the restaurant. During the drive, Manolis boasted to Eleni about his family's riches, a habit he enjoyed with new acquaintances. He then proposed they all go to a summer house owned by his parents near one of their restaurants in the town of Lindos. Eleni felt this was an excessively forward suggestion for a first date, but Manolis was highly persuasive, and Alexandros also endorsed the idea. Police speculate that at this moment, with the trauma of the previous year fresh in her mind, Eleni felt trapped and feared that something terrible might happen right there in the car. It was likely at this point that she sent the distress message to her friend. After collecting their kebabs, they proceeded to the summer house, where they ate and talked on the roof. After the meal, Manolis and Alexandros propositioned Eleni, asking her to have an intimate encounter with both of them. She, of course, refused. The two men would not accept her rejection. As one of them threatened her with a knife, the other restrained her. They forced her into a room with 2 mattresses on the floor where she fought back, but they overpowered her, beat her, and committed the most atrocious act imaginable. When they were finished, Eleni, crying uncontrollably, pleaded with them to let her go. They refused, intending to violate her again. In a moment of sheer desperation, seizing upon a brief lapse in their attention, she made a break for it, but was quickly recaptured. Manolis then unleashed a storm of uncontrollable rage upon Eleni, striking her repeatedly with any object he could find, including a clothes iron. At the end of the assault, barely able to speak, Eleni begged them to take her to a hospital, promising they could just leave her at the entrance. According to Alexandros, he considered helping her, but Manolis was unwilling to risk being identified, and they mutually decided to end her life. They drove her to the top of a cliff, where they threw her over the edge, intending for the tide to wash her body away. Their plan failed. The tide that night was low, and without them realizing, Eleni's body became trapped among the rocks. In their attempt to dispose of her clothing and personal belongings, they tossed them over the cliff as well, but they failed to account for the strength and direction of the wind, which scattered the items across the area beyond their ability to retrieve them. They completed this act without any witnesses. Afterward, Manolis and Alexandros returned to the house and attempted to eradicate any evidence of the crime they had committed. Point 2. Their cleanup efforts were amateurish at best. When forensic investigators arrived, they discovered numerous bloodstains throughout various rooms of the house. With Alexandros's confession and the mounting physical evidence, the two were arrested and charged with murder. More than a year passed before the trial began. During this period, local media engaged in xenophobic attacks against Alexandros, consistently emphasizing his Albanian heritage. A narrative was constructed that painted Alexandros as the main perpetrator who had corrupted the supposedly impressionable Manolis. This narrative gained traction when it was revealed that Alexandros also had a prior police record, which, upon closer inspection for the trial, was found to include incidents of sexual violence. In addition to the media, a segment of the public rallied behind Manolis, demonizing Alexandros for his Albanian background, a stark revelation of the xenophobia that remains prevalent in Greece. Simultaneously, certain media outlets launched a campaign to smear Eleni's character, labeling her as promiscuous and irresponsible. They insinuated that she had invited the assault by agreeing to a three-way encounter, citing the incident from a year prior as evidence that she knowingly put herself in danger by getting into a car with two men again. The segment of the population that supported Manolis readily accepted this victim-blaming theory, exposing another terrible facet of Greek society: sexism. Much of this public relations campaign was bankrolled by the Koukouras family, who were using all their money and influence to absolve Manolis. In stark opposition, feminist movements from all over the country, which had been tracking the case since the beginning, organized a series of large-scale marches demanding justice for Eleni. They protested the systemic protection afforded to sexual offenders by the police, bringing attention to how victims are frequently silenced and denied support by authorities who seem uninterested in investigating such crimes. In January 2020, as the hearings commenced, Manolis's defense team filed a petition to have all women excluded from the jury, claiming they would be too emotional and inherently biased. This motion was, thankfully, denied, and the jury ultimately included mothers of daughters who had also been victims of sexual violence. Throughout the trial, the core strategy for Manolis's defense was to echo the narrative being pushed by the media, that Alexandros was the true villain who had led Manolis astray, and that Eleni was ultimately responsible for her own fate. In a desperate attempt to secure a more lenient sentence than the prosecution's demand for life imprisonment, his family also procured a medical report from two psychiatrists, attesting to a diminished mental capacity requiring daily medication. This scheme was later exposed as fraudulent, and both doctors had their professional licenses revoked. The prosecution, led by a formidable team, presented overwhelming evidence that demonstrated both the young Greek man and the young Albanian man were equally culpable. They systematically dismantled the defense's absurd narratives and proved that the crime was premeditated. Eleni's autopsy report was presented in court, and its contents sent a shock-wave through the room. Despite being thrown from a height of 10 meters, Eleni had survived the fall. However, the catastrophic injuries she sustained had left her paralyzed, incapable of moving, standing, or crying out for help. The official cause of her death was drowning. In her closing statement, the prosecutor, Aristotelia, expressed profound empathy for Eleni and her family. She vehemently condemned every attempt to vilify the victim and indicted the system for protecting criminals based on their gender or nationality. The trial concluded in May 2020, with the jury and court reaching a unanimous verdict. Alexandros Loutsai and Manolis Koukouras were guilty of the crimes of sexual violence and murder. Point 3. Both were sentenced to life imprisonment at a prison in Volos. Point 4. However, Greece's legal system stipulates that while sentences can technically exceed a century, no inmate serves more than a maximum term. For a life sentence, this maximum is 25 years. Many legal experts speculate they could become eligible for parole in as little as 10 years. Weeks after his conviction, Alexandros was in the news again after he requested police intervention from within the prison walls. It is a known issue that Greek inmates often target and abuse prisoners of other nationalities, including Albanians. Point 5. Alexandros reported to prison authorities that he had been subjected to constant insults, shoves, and threats from the moment he arrived. In the final week of May 2020, following a series of severe beatings, he lost consciousness and awoke to find his pants and underwear removed, experiencing excruciating pain in his rectum. A medical examination confirmed that Alexandros had suffered a ruptured internal organ that required emergency surgery. In contrast, there have been no reported incidents involving Manolis in prison. By all accounts, he has remained unharmed, and his family continues to battle the courts to have his sentence reviewed. It is a disheartening reality that it took Eleni's horrific death to force a segment of the Greek population to begin seriously considering women's rights. The prosecutor, Aristotelia, publicly reiterated a critical point she made during the trial, one that needs to be universally understood. Any sexual act without explicit consent from all parties is rape. While this concept may seem fundamental, it was, shockingly, the first time such a clear statement had ever been made in a Greek courtroom. Eleni's case is now the impetus for long overdue discussions about transforming the country's laws. Richard Ramirez. I think most humans have in them the capacity to commit murder. It is not because they are morally superior, but because they are imprisoned in a web of responsibilities, commitments, beliefs. In the scorching summer of 1985, a wave of primal fear swept across California. Doors were bolted, windows were nailed shut, and a terrified populace slept with the lights on, haunted by the specter of a man who prowled the night. He was dubbed the Night Stalker. His real name was Richard Ramirez, a self-professed Satanist whose random, sadistic rampage of murder, rape, and torture made him one of the most feared serial killers in American history. Ramirez was not just brutal, he was terrifyingly unpredictable. He targeted men, women, and children with no discernible pattern. He broke into homes under the cover of darkness and unleashed chaos. Sometimes he used a gun, other times a knife, a tire iron, or his bare hands. This utter randomness amplified the terror, creating a suffocating wave of paranoia across Southern California. No one knew who he would target next, or why. Born in El Paso, Texas, in 1960, Ramirez's early life was a harbinger of the monster he would become. He was raised in poverty and exposed to extreme violence from a young age. His father was abusive, and by his teenage years, Ramirez was deeply involved with drugs. But perhaps the most malignant influence was his cousin, Miguel, a Green Beret who had returned from Vietnam. Miguel would horrify the young Richard with graphic photos of Vietnamese women he had raped and murdered overseas, boasting of torture and mutilation. When Ramirez was just 13, he witnessed Miguel murder his own wife, shooting her in the face during an argument. That moment irrevocably seared violence into his psyche. By his 20s, Ramirez had drifted to California, where he became fully immersed in a lifestyle of petty crime, drug abuse, and Satanism. He believed he was an agent of the devil and began to incorporate satanic elements into his crimes. He would leave pentagrams scrawled at crime scenes and was reported by survivors to have forced them to swear to Satan during his assaults. For Ramirez, murder was both a source of sadistic pleasure and a dark ritual. Between 1984 and 1985, Ramirez unleashed his reign of terror. He began in June 1984, murdering 9-year-old Jenny Vink in her home, stabbing her relentlessly. Over the next year, he struck again and again with escalating brutality. In March 1985, he shot a man to death before sexually assaulting the man's fiancée. Weeks later, he broke into another home, murdering a 4-year-old man and raping his wife. The violence grew more extreme. He mutilated his victims, gouged out their eyes, kidnapped children, and committed acts of unspeakable cruelty. Unlike most serial killers who operate with stealth, Ramirez seemed to thrive on chaos. He didn't care if his victims were awake or if there were multiple people in a home. His goal was to spread maximum fear. Police were initially baffled by his lack of a consistent method. Sometimes he was careful, leaving no prints. Other times, he was sloppy, leaving behind clues like a shoe impression that was eventually traced to a specific model of Avia sneaker, a key piece of evidence that would later link him to multiple crime scenes. By the summer of 1985, the Night Stalker was a household name. Terrifying headlines dominated the news. Gun sales in Los Angeles skyrocketed. Frantic residents formed neighborhood watch groups, determined to protect themselves from the faceless predator. But Ramirez was not invincible. In August 1985, a crucial break came when a surviving victim gave a detailed description of him. Shortly after, investigators recovered a single, clear fingerprint from a stolen car he had abandoned. The print belonged to Richard Ramirez, a drifter with a lengthy rap sheet. Authorities immediately released his mugshot to the media. Suddenly, the Night Stalker had a name and a face. Days later, Ramirez was spotted in East Los Angeles. When residents recognized him from the news, he attempted to flee. But this time, the community fought back. A group of locals chased him through the streets, cornering him and beating him with a metal pipe until police arrived. The city that had been held hostage by fear had finally captured its monster. His 1989 trial was as bizarre and disturbing as his crimes. Ramirez showed absolutely no remorse. He would smirk at the cameras, flashed a pentagram he had carved into his palm, and at one point yelled, "Hail Satan!" He reveled in the media attention, becoming a twisted kind of celebrity. A bizarre subculture of killer groupies emerged, with women sending him love letters and nude photos. The evidence against him was overwhelming: fingerprints, ballistics, eyewitness testimony, and stolen property found in his possession. He was convicted of 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. The jury sentenced him to death. Even then, Ramirez remained defiant. Staring down the court, he said, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland." He was sent to California's death row at San Quentin, where he would spend the next 2 decades. Richard Ramirez died of cancer in 2013, long before his execution could be carried out. His legacy is one of pure, chaotic terror. He didn't have a preferred victim type or a predictable pattern. He was random, sadistic, and fueled by a malevolent ideology. That is what made him so uniquely terrifying. You couldn't prepare for him. You could only lock your doors and pray he didn't choose your home. The Night Stalker taught California a brutal lesson. Sometimes evil doesn't lurk in the shadows. It kicks down your door in the middle of the night. Zachary Brian Berkey. Zachary Zach Brian Berkey was born on the 6th of January, 1992. At 26, he had carved out a life for himself in New Orleans, Louisiana, where he worked as a lifeguard. He was universally described as a sweetheart, the kind of person who would go out of his way to lend a hand, offer a listening ear, or provide help without a second thought. But on the 16th of September, 2018, this kind soul disappeared. The last time his family saw him was around 7 p.m. as he left his mother's home on Camp Street, riding his distinctive mountain bike, a black frame with thick, noticeable rims. Neither Zach nor his bike has ever been seen again. Shortly after he vanished, a homeless man named Demetrius Williams was apprehended using Zach's debit card at a Rite Aid pharmacy on the very night of his disappearance. He was eventually charged with 16 counts of access device fraud. When questioned, Williams claimed he and Zach had been drinking together at Cooter Brown's Tavern in the Riverbend area. He alleged they discussed narcotics, and that he eventually left Zach in the company of two other men known only as Buff and Slim Shady. Williams insisted he never saw Zach after that moment. Surveillance footage confirmed that Zach was at Cooter Brown's that night. At approximately 8:25 p.m., he was seen calmly withdrawing $80 from an ATM. His mother, Christine, noted that it was not out of character for her son to strike up conversations with strangers. What happened in the moments after he walked out of that bar remains the core of the mystery. Zach was last seen in the Pigeon Town area, wearing a dark gray t-shirt, black shorts, and red and black flip-flops, pushing his black mountain bike. Not a single trace of these items has ever been recovered. 3 days after he was last seen, Christine received a call from his employer. Zach had missed his shift on the 17th of September. This was deeply uncharacteristic. He was responsible and always kept his mother informed of his whereabouts. A missing persons report was filed immediately. As the family frantically pieced together his last known movements, they discovered the multiple uses of his bank card. Zach's last confirmed transaction was at a Rally's fast food restaurant, just a quarter-mile from his home. Around 7 p.m., he made a final phone call to a family friend. Christine learned that something during that call had deeply upset her son. Afterwards, he biked approximately 3 miles to the Black Pearl neighborhood, where he was spotted by a man named Robert, who was also homeless, sitting on railroad tracks near Cooter Brown's. Robert recalled Zach looking agitated and talking to himself. Robert's account gets hazy from there. He said Zach left the tracks and approached a group of men by a monument, one of whom was Demetrius Williams. Later, Zach entered Cooter Brown's, withdrew the $80, and came back out. Williams told police that he and Zach then went to a Shell gas station where Zach purchased 2 beers. Strangely, Robert insisted he never saw Zach's bike. As Christine dug deeper, she went back to speak with Robert, who recalled a chilling detail he had previously omitted. He remembered Demetrius Williams commenting that Zach had gotten sick and was having trouble staying awake after they parted ways. This raised alarming new possibilities. If Zach had suffered an overdose, his fate could have been easily concealed. Robert grimly pointed out the presence of alligators in the local waterways, suggesting that if Zach's body had been put in the water, no trace would ever be found. The investigation took a bizarre legal turn when Williams was arrested, not for a crime against Zach, but for the fraudulent use of his bank card, which totaled a mere $87. However, after numerous delays, the charges against him were dropped in March 2019, with a court ruling that his right to a speedy trial had been violated. Zach's family has never given up hope, but their search for a kind, trusting man who seemingly vanished after an act of generosity has yielded nothing. If you have any information on the whereabouts of Zachary Berkey, please contact the New Orleans Police Department Nahendra Faye Davis. Nahendra Faye Davis, affectionately known as Nene to her friends and family, was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, on the 27th of December, 1983. A devoted mother, she was the anchor in the lives of her two children, a constant presence they could always rely on. Her warmth and unwavering dedication defined her. On the afternoon of the 27th of December, 2018, her 35th birthday, Nahendra completed a routine task, dropping her children off at her mother's residence in the Glen Oaks neighborhood. It was a familiar scene, but it would become the last confirmed sighting of her. Merely hours later, her white 2015 Dodge Challenger was located, abandoned, on Scenic Highway near 72nd Avenue. Inside the vehicle sat her purse, her keys, and her cash, all untouched. The car was discovered in an area that had flooded due to a recent storm. Yet the water level was never high enough to have carried the vehicle there. The location itself was unsettling, a desolate stretch bordered by dense woods, transient hotels, and a sprawling interstate overpass, a place where a person could disappear without a trace. Despite a comprehensive search of the surrounding area and a review of all available surveillance footage, not a single viable lead emerged. Her cell phone provided no digital trail, with reports indicating it was likely powered off early in the day. Nahendra was last seen wearing a navy blue dress accented with green and brown stripes, an image that is seared into the memory of her loved ones. From the beginning, her family has been convinced that her disappearance was the result of foul play, a belief that has only strengthened over time. They have consistently voiced their frustration with the official investigation, particularly with the bureaucratic hurdles that stalled progress. Although her vehicle was found within Baton Rouge city limits, her case was transferred to the Baker Police Department, the jurisdiction of her home address. This procedural handoff created a chasm between departments, obstructing the flow of vital information. The Baker PD, a significantly smaller agency with limited resources, was ill-equipped to manage an investigation of this magnitude. Critical investigative tools, including access to regional surveillance networks, specialized forensic teams, and digital evidence analysis, were controlled by agencies no longer directly involved. Consequently, many potential avenues were left unexplored. Over the years, Nahendra's family has fought tirelessly for answers, but the case has grown cold. Sporadic rumors of sightings in other cities would surface, each one sparking a brief moment of hope before being proven false. A peculiar detail that remains an enigma is a sudden change to her social media profile just 2 weeks before she vanished, updating her relationship status to engaged. Nahendra's disappearance has carved a profound void in the lives of her children, a void that deepens with each passing year. The unanswered questions cast a long shadow over her family, who feel that with every anniversary, another piece of the puzzle slips further away. If you have any information, no matter how trivial it may seem, please come forward. You can contact the Baker Police Department at 225-775-6000 or submit an anonymous tip to Crime Stoppers at 225-344-7867. Keeping Nahendra's story in the public eye is crucial. The more people who learn of her case, the greater the chance that someone will finally provide the missing piece to this heartbreaking puzzle. Madison Renee Allen. For 2-year-old Madison Renee Allen, life was meant to be lived on her own terms. Born on the 1st of August, 1991, in Liberty, Mississippi, she was the eldest daughter of Lean Rollins and a devoted mother to 3 children. Madison's confidence was undeniable, expressed in how she dressed and the unapologetic way she embraced a life full of celebration and friends. In 2023, seeking a new chapter, she relocated to Zachary, Louisiana, finding herself in East Baton Rouge Parish, just a short distance north of the city itself. She took up residence at the Ash Street home of a man named Thomas Morris. On the morning of the 29th of November, 2023, Madison was exchanging text messages with her mother, Lean, sharing exciting news about landing a new job and her ambitions to return to school. But after that exchange, a sudden and unnerving silence fell. No one has seen or heard from Madison since, leaving her family, and most painfully her 3 children, suspended in a state of agonizing uncertainty. The scene Madison left behind was perplexing. All of her personal belongings remained in the house, suggesting she had every intention of coming back. When questioned by Zachary police, Thomas Morris initially stated that Madison had walked out of his house on the 29th of November. Yet, months later, his narrative shifted, and he claimed the date was actually the 1st of December. In a Facebook Messenger conversation with Madison's mother, Thomas spun another story, asserting that Madison had collected all of her possessions upon leaving a claim directly contradicted by the evidence. He maintained that she departed in an unknown vehicle and simply vanished. Her friends confirmed they hadn't heard from her either. Curiously, in his early conversations with Lean, Thomas failed to mention that Madison had been living with him at all. He claimed he hadn't seen her since Thanksgiving and that he, too, had been searching for her. But a look through Madison's messages revealed a text from the 30th of October, 2023, where she confessed to a friend that she felt trapped at Thomas's house. Why did he conceal their living arrangement? Why did he fail to alert authorities when she disappeared, leaving everything she owned behind? What explains his shifting timeline and the lie about her belongings? Investigators learned that just before she went missing, Madison had informed Thomas of her desire to leave his home. It may have been their final conversation. Thomas admitted to police a disturbing pattern. He would frequently meet women at the racetrack gas station on Airline Highway and invite them to his residence, promising to provide for their needs. This pattern took a darker turn in January 2024, when another woman vanished following a dispute with Thomas. He admitted to forcing her out of his car in an abandoned lot. She was later tragically discovered to have been sold into human trafficking. Then, in October 2024, Thomas was arrested and faced strangulation charges after a different woman staying with him reported a violent assault. The chilling portrait of Thomas was starkly reinforced by his own brother, Joseph Morris, who posted a public warning on Facebook stating that Thomas preys on women who lack a strong family network to search for them. Madison's family is now left navigating a labyrinth of contradictions and unanswered questions. The only certainty is that Thomas Morris was the last person known to have seen her alive, a fact he does not dispute. So, where is Madison? What transpired after she declared her intention to leave? Madison is heavily tattooed, with angel wings across her back, rosary beads, an infant's footprint on one of her thighs, and tattoos on both of her wrists. Her 3 children are growing up without their mother, their lives overshadowed by her absence. Her case is made all the more haunting by the fact that she disappeared just 2 months after arriving in a new town. If you possess any information regarding the disappearance of Madison Allen, you are urged to contact Detective Justin Miner at the Zachary Police Department at 225-9631-791. These names remind us that monsters don't just live in horror stories. They walk among us. They smile, they shake hands, they go to school, they raise families, and behind that mask, they destroy lives. From Bundy's charm to Dharma's fridge of horrors to Pedro's twisted code of vigilante justice, these cases reveal the darkest depths of human cruelty. They are a haunting reminder that the most devastating evil can sometimes come from the people who seem the most ordinary. If you found this exploration into these shocking cases compelling, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Which of these killers do you think was the most disturbing? Share your thoughts in the comments below.